In terms of this kind of short kind of talk, like presentation, I just thought I'd focus on what's happening in terms of like Irish capitalism, and it's mainly focused on the South. Like we'll be dealing with NAMA, and there probably is an entire session that like could be done just on kind of Project Eagle and the North as well, which is a fascinating kind of story in and of itself. But like at the moment, just what I see in terms of housing in the South as it is, at this time, is that I see that there's a clash kind of going on that's within kind of Irish kind of capitalism itself, and it's a very interesting one. So when we kind of step back, and instead of just like having a kind of blanket kind of term for Irish kind of capitalism, when we kind of look under the bonnet and start kind of delving into its own kind of clashes and its own kind of tensions, I do think that these do kind of shine a light on the particular aspects of the housing crisis as it is like today, like in the South, which is different to the crisis like as it was even like even kind of 10 years ago. And the main difference is the institutional investors who have moved in. What I see though is that there's a clash there between that kind of comprador middleman kind of like ideology that is just deeply rooted in the very structures of the kind of Southern Irish state, and the construction, building, housing and housing industry, which up till 2008 was very much an indigenous capitalist endeavor. There was very little by way of direct foreign investment outside of third-party kind of loans to banks. That's changed now, and there's a clash that is kind of going on. We can see that in terms of the recent housing for Auckland document, which highlighted that we have kind of small builders who are not building at the moment, and one of the main reasons we should give is that they can't get loans from banks. There's no capital that's being kind of made available there for them. All of the capital that has been used or like funneled through kind of institutional investors. That's not to take the side of like small builders, but like it does show that there's something different happening now than 10, 15 years ago. And the big change, of course, is in 2008, because that whole system, that whole kind of capitalist construction game blew up. The kind of two main banks that was funding local Irish kind of builders, Anglo-Irish Bank and the Irish Nationwide, they went bust. And both AIB and the Bank of Ireland had to deleverage an awful lot of their kind of housing construction loan portfolio as well, and are very adverse to get kind of back into it. So the solution that has been kind of put forward is one that is second nature to the way that the Irish state thinks, which is FDI. So to a hammer, like everything looks like a nail, and to the Irish state, every solution is FDI. So we have this huge kind of move like there towards rewriting kind of legislation to allow this kind of this shift to happen. But what we're seeing though is that this idea, this kind of ideology, this kind of middleman kind of like ideology, which up till 2011 had not really been part of like construction, now is. And that's because when the state kind of moved in, it brought its way of thinking, and its way of thinking is foreign direct investment and tax breaks that will solve absolutely kind of everything. They're not very imaginative. So for every kind of so it's every problem, that's always going to be their solution. But the indigenous kind of capitalist class, based around construction, is just in no position to kind of resist that. Like if we had like from an indigenous kind of capitalist like viewpoint, the solution would be a kind of state bank that would give out kind of loans to allow kind of small builders to become kind of small builders all over again. They're not doing that. It's all based on foreign investors. Any loans that are being kind of given out have normal kind of commercial terms kind of latched onto them, and that's not what these kind of small builders need. So I mean, this has deep roots in this, in the Southern Irish state, going back to its formation in 1922. This kind of comprador and middleman class was very strong in cattle, in banking. These were its main kind of areas. And in the kind of post kind of World War kind of period, when there's a move all across Europe for a post-World War reconstruction, Ireland's role in that was to build up and expand and diversify its agricultural sector. And it didn't do this. It didn't actually invest in its own, in like fertilizer, in like new plants, in like new forms of like farming, because the ranching system was so strong to kind of block that, and the banking system just was more interested in just keep on investing in like London. So uniquely in like Western Europe, Ireland goes down a kind of FDI kind of model from about 1955 and onwards. That was not the plan. The plan was for Ireland to do what Denmark did. It was to build up its indigenous, like industry. But the two kind of blocks were those blocks that were most tied to kind of British kind of capital. So that's now been spun. The spin now is that Ireland, was backward, or that this kind of FDI model, that was the model which the US wanted for Ireland, or that Europe wanted, and that wasn't the kind of case at all. So by kind of 1960s and like 1970s, there's a very strong kind of FDI kind of model that has been kind of put forward as the industrial like policy, which itself had grown out of how to kind of keep on board this kind of comprador kind of class. They're shaping Ireland in their own image, even as the effects change on the ground. In the 1980s, of course, this expands into finance and into kind of tax evasion and like wholesale kind of tax kind of avoidance. Now, we can say with some certainty that 2008 was a genuine game changer, because a lot of the ideas that are being put forward now in terms of REITs, in terms of institutional investors, these were actually put forward by a guy called Bill Nolan back in 1997. He was shot down. Nobody would go with his idea. He was saying bring in, institutional banks and investors is the way forward. But the game was completely kind of sewn up. He tries again in like 2002, and Conor McCabe kind of shuts him down all over again. But then 2008 happens. The banks blow up. The builders are kind of wiped out. And like Bill Nolan sees his moment and starts lobbying NAMA. And by kind of 2009, NAMA is completely on board with the whole kind of REIT kind of offsale kind of system. So much so that NAMA starts lobbying with kind of Bill Nolan for a change in law. And this law changes in kind of 2013. Bill Nolan himself has written a PhD on this. It's available online. It's with the University of Ulster, I think. And he lays out his entire plan for how to monetize, how to financialize social housing and kind of so-called affordable rents. So the entire kind of game plan is kind of more or less there. But he wouldn't have had any kind of move in were not for what happened back in kind of 2008. So what we're seeing now is that there's as the institutional investors, as they become more and more stronger, their entry into the South has been shaped by that kind of ideology of kind of middleman, kind of comprador, kind of capitalism, and the state in its nature is shaping housing policy now in those ways. Now, that's not to argue or say that if it was kind of Southern Irish builders who were doing this, it would be all kind of it would be all kind of rosy in the garden. It wouldn't, but it would be different, and we would have a kind of different kind of system. So we can see at the moment, I think anyway, that just whereas this kind of comprador, kind of middleman kind of system was kind of deeply rooted in terms of kind of agriculture, in like industry or in industrial kind of policy, in like banking as well. It's now starting to move out of there, and now it's moving into what we're seeing as a traditionally indigenous kind of southern kind of capitalist kind of interests. To be kind of simplistic, you could put it down as kind of Fianna Fáil's base in kind of capitalism, and now that's, and because that base kind of blew up in kind of 2008, this other kind of interests are now kind of moving in, and they're kind of colonizing the deacon ideology. Now, the thing around deacon institutional investors, and Brian's going to talk with, he knows more about this, haven't done kind of much more kind of research, but they'll never be hegemonic in terms of like housing policy. They're not going to be interested in building houses in Sligo or Carlow or in Armagh. That's not where their interests are. Their interests are in the big cities and the high-end stuff. The issue at the moment is that they are price setters, and they're market kind of setters. So they're actually kind of pushing out kind of everything because the banks are not doing what the banks should be doing, and lending to the smaller kind of smaller kind of builders. So we're going to see, I think, a growing kind of tension there between kind of well, first of all, in cities, as the housing crisis gets worse, and then a different kind of tension there between those who are in the cities and those areas outside of the cities. It might lead to a greater deacon population of the South outside of those kind of central kind of areas, because there's nothing being done. Like these kind of institutional like investors, they're not going to be building 50 housing units in Carlow. They're not going to be building kind of 80 units in like Waterford. That's not where their interests are. And the rental and the rental element, which is a huge part of this, that's part of a wider kind of wider worldwide kind of strategy now, where investors want guaranteed rents for 20, 30 years. And the best way to do that is through social housing. So now they are financializing social housing because they see that as a guaranteed kind of income. So then, like in the south, we now have affordable rents being put down at €1,200 a month, which is just kind of madness. I'm now at kind of 15 minutes, so I'll just stop there.
All right, so I'll just pass over to Brian now.
Now I'm off mute. Right. So yeah, I suppose, yeah, Conor's kind of set the backdrop to the bits I want to talk about. When I was talking to Chris by email there and talking to Conor over the last few days, I mean, there's just so much stuff to talk about with housing. It just covers, you know, there's so much ground and so many angles. The problem with a talk like this is actually just trying to zero in on something kind of manageable and digestible in a 15 or 20 minute window. So apologies if I kind of go down the odd little cul-de-sac or maybe skip over things. You would need not hours, but days to cover just this topic, just this whole vulture landlord, as we would call them, or institutional landlord kind of space. So to start, I mean, my own interest in this and really from about 2014, 2015, I live in South Dublin in the Rathdown constituency, and this area is kind of like it's like ground zero for the vulture takeover of housing, and where property collapsed in most of Dublin, the property prices peaked. I think most people would agree late 2006, started sort of tanking early 2007. And a lot of areas, prices were still dropping right through until 2017, 2018. But in this part of the country, prices bottomed out in about 2011. So the drop was about 5 years. And from about 2012 on, house prices started climbing again. And once house prices started climbing, construction started again. And I noticed locally that these apartment blocks that were getting built weren't coming to market. And it just struck me as peculiar. This is now 2014, 2015. And work had recommenced on buildings that had been left idle from the Celtic Tiger. So one example right beside me here, a place called Wickham Point, 260 odd apartments that had been kind of 3/4 built and then abandoned. And suddenly there was work happening on them again. And there were several sites like that where half-built apartments suddenly started working again. So I was kind of taking interest in that. Eirigi was, as people remember, sort of 2016, the water tax was kind of coming to a resolution as a campaign, or at least it was, you know, looked like an end was in sight. And we were kind of looking at housing and saying, you know what, this is the next big one. This is the next big campaign issue. We need to get in on this one. So I started looking at doing this, started on the research, and at that stage, the revenue commissioners were producing a document off the back of the local property tax. And at the very back page of this document, they produced it every quarter. It listed the number of landlords by number of properties owned that had registered or maybe paid the local property tax. So it was, you know, people who owned 2 properties, people who owned 3 to 10 properties, 10 to 50, 50 to 100 and so on. But there was this category that of 200 plus homes, and it was a significant sort of chunk. So using the services of Claire Daly, ended up putting in a few private members' questions around this category of what you might call mega landlord. And Revenue actually admitted that they had published the wrong data and they changed the data and so on. But it was clear from that point that there was something happening in Irish housing where these mega landlords, there was always Gombean men, Gombean Irish landlords, individuals, maybe operating through a company, who owned, you know, scores of homes or maybe a couple of hundred homes at most. But this was a different category that was emergent here. A very small number of individuals or companies which are registered as the same thing, that was emerging, that owned 200 plus. And we put in questions asking them how many own 500 plus, and Revenue Commissioner came back and said, we can't give you that information because it would be it'd be too easy to figure out who it is, right? What companies they are. So that kind of got me, piqued my interest, and a couple of us in Eirigi started kind of digging in on it and started doing the research on it. And Conor's covered this, so I'm probably I want to cover this maybe just quickly on the research side, and then I'll come to the kind of activism campaign stuff. But as Conor had said, what you started to see, and once you were kind of alerted to it, which we would have been from 2016 on, and you started doing the research, what essentially happened was from 2013, 2010, by 2010, NAMA was up and running. As Conor said, NAMA had bought into this idea of selling off huge tranches of properties, some of which included residential and development property. 2013, Fine Gael and Labour, who are now in power, so Fianna Fáil and the Green Party got the ball rolling with NAMA, this huge fire sale. They're literally giving away property at a fraction of its real value. 2013, Fine Gael and Labour are in, and Noonan introduces the Real Estate Investment Trust legislation. 2015, Fine Gael and Labour reduced the minimum size of apartments in Dublin and Cork, again at the behest of these kind of new kind of institutional landlords. 2017, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil again introduced the approved housing body fast track planning. And then we had 2018, we had Fine Gael, again with Fianna Fáil support, introduced build to rent as a specific category within the housing planning structure. Up until then, there was properties being built by Vulture landlords, but this was a new category that was created. And again, shared living or co-living, right? So we started to see the taxation system changed, the planning system was changed, and housing policy was all changed to facilitate these new emergent kind of landlords. We're using this term Vulture landlord, and we're essentially using it as a catch-all for pension funds, traditional Vulture funds, real estate investment trusts, high net individuals, any sort of institutional or company or corporate owner, mega landlord. We're putting them under this umbrella term Vulture landlord. It probably doesn't have a deep economic definition within economic circles or within academic circles, but in political circles, I think people know what a Vulture landlord is when they see it. So what started out for me anyway, sort of as localized research in the Rathdown area, escalated into national sort of research. In saying national, it isn't yet a major phenomenon in the 6 counties. So there's primarily a 26 county focused issue at this point. There is some attempt, some planning gone in for build to rent in the north, but it's primarily a 26 county issue. And as Conor said, it's very, very heavily weighted in Dublin. If you, at this point in time, so if we fast forward, if the real kind of institutional landlords really started buying up in bulk from NAMA in 2011, 2012, 2013, the big deals are being done. Since then, there's been, and it's increased in pace with each passing year, huge number of companies. I mean, I'll just briefly, Avestus, Real IS REIT, Irish REIT, that people know, Kennedy Wilson, Hibernian REIT, the LRC Group, Carrisford, Avestus, Urbio, Irish Life, Patrizia, Greystar, DWS. All of these are either foreign or foreign controlled, or it's foreign money that come in behind them. So some of them have been set up by Irish individuals, many of whom are involved in banking previously or in finance previously, set up kind of almost front companies that are being funded with foreign money. The only real noticeable Irish exception is the Comer Group, which is the Comer brothers from Galway, who are in that mega landlord category. They've somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 homes, which they picked up from NAMA. But the rest, the vast bulk, are international, German, Dutch, English, Canadian, American, Israeli. I mean, it's the whole gamut. On the research end of it, so what we did, and probably this is why I wanted to come in as a share. Hopefully, this is going to work. Is it there from here? Maybe I can't do it from here. I can, right. So I'm hoping maybe Jonathan, you could give me a nod. Can you see the screen there?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone can see that. Perfect. Okay. So what I want to just bring you up to is, in the end, we just took all the information and put it into a map. So some of you may have seen this, maybe you have, maybe you haven't. It's due an update. There's loads of additional information into it. It hasn't been updated since about July, but the updates, there's a lot of work involved in it. So, because this is a fast-moving picture, but I'll just bring it up here to give people a flavour, right? So, if we come out to a national level, it'll give you a sense of what you're looking at. I hope that's displaying okay for everyone. So in Galway, there's a cluster, which is primarily the Comer brothers. Their properties they bought off NAMA in Galway. REIT, Kennedy Wilson, small number of properties, and the LRC group have a few in Cork as well, okay? Comer also have like small, like Comer, it's slightly different in that they had a lot of cash and they spotted when NAMA was selling off, like this kind of would be nearly contrary to what Conor was saying, but it's exceptional, it won't be the norm. There might be like, 22 apartments were for sale in Naas, or, 16 apartments for sale in Ennis. And the Comer group bought a lot of them. But they were being sold by NAMA at an incredibly low price. So that's unlikely to be the main model, or the future model of other than the social housing, which Conor has mentioned. I think that's where these guys are going to get into rural Ireland. But so this is Ballaclia as it stands now. So within that map, again, if you're watching, it'd be a bit easier to see on a laptop, I'd imagine, than on a phone. But anyway, there's essentially 3 types of icon on it. So if you come out to my part of the world, when I say ground zero, you'll see what I mean. So each of these Vulture icons represent a property that is now is currently owned by, is built, owned, occupied, lived in, right? So this one, for example, is bringing up the one I mentioned, Wickham Point, 213 homes owned by Hibernian REIT, right? Or Hibernian REIT. So each of those vultures that you can see is an apartment block is occupied, right? That is owned by what we're calling a vulture landlord. Everywhere you see a crane, which is the yellow icon there, is a construction site where the apartments, and they're not exclusive apartments, they're 90% apartments, where either the apartments or houses are destined to end up in vulture landlord hands. So that means they are either been built as built to rent housing, which under the planning legislation, they can only be sold as built to rent. They can't be sold to owner occupiers. If they get granted planning as built to rent, they have to be sold to an institutional landlord. So they're either that category, or they're being built under traditional planning, but are have already been forward purchased by a vulture landlord, or they are being built directly by a vulture landlord. So in the case of like Kennedy Wilson or Eirigi, they have land, some of which they got from NAMA, which they're now building apartments on. So that's what you're saying. And then the final icon you can see there, folks, is a red circle with a green tick on it. And that is planning permission granted for developments that will end up in vulture landlord hands, i.e. it's one of the vultures themselves who applied for planning permission and secured it, or it's a build to rent, or in the case of Marlett, they're in the, for example, Marlett, the construction company, are building 2,000 apartments at the moment. They have them on the market in six different developments. And they're on the market as a single lot to be sold, 2,000 homes in one lot. Not all of them are built to rent. They're all under construction, but they are going to end up in vulture landlord hands. So essentially what you're looking at there, and it's worse than what it's here now, because we've at least maybe another 10 or 15 entries to go onto it. So that map really kind of is the culmination of a lot of research by myself and others in Eirigi. And what it's showing at the moment here is a total of 31,000 plus homes, of which the breakdown is 15,000 are already built and occupied, or there might be the odd one where the apartment is partially occupied and is in the process of being occupied, but ballpark 15,000 plus. 10,000, 9,800, so let's call it 10,000, which are under construction, and another 5,700 that have been granted planning permission. As I say, it's worse than that because this hasn't been updated since July. So at a guesstimate, I'd say the current figure is probably closer to about 33,000, 34,000 homes. And when you put that against, I mean, the total number of houses that's getting built in a year at the moment is maybe 20,000 at most. And here we can see that the vultures have almost 10,000 under construction at the moment. So we use the term the takeover, vulture takeover of housing, or vulture landlord takeover of housing. And like, that's not kind of exaggeration or hyperbole or for propaganda effects. In Dublin again, and is has been primarily a Dublin issue. In the last 2 years, the Vulture landlords have bought 90 to 95% of all new apartments. And the bulk of house construction is apartments. Now, they are also buying housing estates. So again, people can get a look at this map later if they want. But what we've done, listed below the map here, are all the entries. So basically, like a given entry here, for example, it's the location, which is Charlestown out in Finglas, 235 homes. The Vulture landlord is Eirigi REIT. And as you can see, it's, it's a lot, and like 30,000 is, it's almost like you get to a certain size with housing or numbers and it becomes sort of abstract, So, we've included these here so that people can really localize, and this is coming into the campaign end of it, but we hope that this map really gives people that kind of sense of a very local story. Again, it will be primarily for Dubs, it'll be a local story, but there's, the knock-on effect is felt across the state. One of the things I wanted to just mention in this as well is this idea that it's only Dublin, or it's only really high-end apartments in Dublin, which is kind of one of the spins that the establishment put out. It's not like there is significant amount of housing. This is just one here, St. Edmunds and Lucan. But these are traditional housing estates that were bought en bloc. And hence the big kerfuffle there was a few months ago about the one in Maynooth that was to be bought and then wasn't bought. But there are significant numbers of houses as opposed to apartments. I don't know if we've got time to talk about that aspect of it, but it's and the other element which I think is worth mentioning in regard to that is Urbio in particular are aiming for what they're calling the middle of the market, and they're increasingly other ones are heading into the social housing end of things. So where originally this might have been, was sort of portrayed as being very niche, just about the exclusive top end of the market, it has now moved into a much wider sections of housing, and also it's moving into commuter belts. So you're seeing stuff in Louth, Meath, Kildare, Wicklow. So it's definitely become a bigger kind of a, certainly not niche in the way that it was once portrayed. Like I can go on and on there. I say people go on there. You're talking, can't remember. It's just down to the end there. You'd see the final number we had. Yeah, there you are. The jam factory in Kerrysford that the developer Platinum Land, that's out in Coolock. So that was development number 164. Okay, so we've identified 164 developments that either have been built and are occupied, are currently under construction, or have had planning permission granted. And those 164 have a total of, as I say, a total of 31,000 Irish homes, which again, set against 1.8 million homes, it mightn't sound like a lot, but it's not its percentage of the current housing stock that matters. It's the percentage of new housing that's ending up in Vulture landlord hands. That's where the real danger is here, and that's where they've gone from essentially from zero to owning about 2% of the housing stock in the space of 6-7 years. Very quickly, just on the, I don't know, just quickly on the campaign stuff, Jonathan, or do you want me to? Or will I stop at that?
Well. Yeah, we'll just move into the discussion part of the program.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Because
so,
I can come in on that. I can come in on the other aspect. I'll stop sharing there, John.
All right, thanks.